What happens when one of Germany's deadliest fighter aces steps into the cockpit of the enemy's most feared aircraft? In 1944, a battle-hardened pilot with over 100 victories was ordered to test a captured P-51 Mustang, and what he discovered shook the entire Luftwaffe. 3 simple words suggested the war was already lost. This story has sparked intense debate, so stay with us as we uncover what really happened. June 1944, a captured airfield somewhere in Germany. Lieutenant Walter Wolfrum was 21 years old and already a legend. He wore the Knight's Cross and had 100 aerial victories. He had been wounded 4 times, shot down, and crash-landed 12 times. The scar tissue on his right hand had healed badly, but his grip on the stick never wavered. By any standard, he was one of the most lethal fighter pilots alive. He walked across the tarmac toward a silver-skinned aircraft marked with German crosses, his hands steady as always. But this wasn't combat. No scramble, no sirens. He had been summoned personally by Luftwaffe High Command to evaluate the machine in front of him, the North American P-51 Mustang. This was the fighter now appearing over the Reich in growing numbers, the one cutting down German pilots faster than the Luftwaffe could explain. His superiors wanted answers. What made it so deadly? Where were its weaknesses? How could anyone survive against it? Wolfram climbed into the cockpit, and what he discovered over the next few hours shook the Luftwaffe to its core. His report reached the highest levels of command, and the reaction wasn't calm analysis. It was something closer to dread. Because what he described wasn't just a better aircraft, but something the Luftwaffe couldn't build, couldn't copy, couldn't overcome with skill, courage, or production. And when his superiors finally understood his words, they faced a truth they had been avoiding for months. They weren't losing a battle. They were losing the war. To understand why, we go back to 1943, when American bombers were being torn apart over Germany. Inside a B-17 at 27,000 feet, the temperature dropped to 50 below zero. Heaters failed. Oxygen masks fogged. Gloves froze. The mission sounded simple: fly deep into Germany, drop bombs, and come home. But it was a deadly illusion. Waiting ahead were Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s, not scrambling in panic, but waiting with precision. By mid-1943, the Luftwaffe knew exactly where American escort fighters had to turn back, about 250 miles from England. Beyond that invisible line, the bombers were alone. And that was where the trap closed. On August 17, 1943, 376 B-17s struck Regensburg and Schweinfurt, targeting ball bearings, the tiny components inside every German war machine. Destroy them and everything stops. Instead, it became a massacre. 60 bombers were lost, 600 airmen gone in a single afternoon. The factories were damaged, but not destroyed. Weeks later, production resumed. So the Americans came back. October 14, 1943. Black Thursday. 291 bombers flew in. 60 were shot down. Hundreds more were lost. A crew needed 25 missions to survive a tour. But on raids like these, losses reached 20%. Do the math. It wasn't survivable. One of those men was Second Lieutenant Harold Stearns, 22 years old, from Akron, Ohio. He flew that mission in a B-17 called Lead Banana. He survived, but later wrote that during 5 hours over enemy territory, with fighters attacking in waves, he had already accepted death. "I wasn't scared anymore," he said. "I was just waiting." He finished his tour. Most of his friends didn't. From the German perspective, the conclusion seemed obvious. General Adolf Galland looked at the numbers and believed they had already won. The Americans couldn't sustain losses like this. Unescorted bombing had failed. Germany's industrial heartland was safe. The situation was stable. But that word stable was a fatal illusion, because in England, something had changed. The P-51 Mustang had once been average strong at low altitude but weak up high. The British tested it, found it underwhelming, and used it for secondary roles. Nothing about it suggested it would change the war. Then in 1942, engineers fitted it with a new engine, the Rolls-Royce Merlin. The result was extraordinary. A sleek, low-drag airframe paired with a powerful engine that thrived at high altitude. Together they created a fighter that could fly farther faster and still fight when it got there. The Germans saw the Mustangs arriving. They read the reports. They knew something had changed, but not how much. They still believed in the escort line. They still trusted distance and physics to protect them. They didn't realize the line no longer existed. And before they discovered that in the sky, one German pilot discovered it on the ground in a cockpit in the summer of 1944. What he reported would change everything. Except by then, it was already too late. If this story pulled you into the frozen, deadly skies over Germany, where every mission could be your last take, a second to hit like and subscribe. It helps bring more untold stories like this to life. And tell me, in the comments, knowing the odds, knowing the math, would you have climbed into that bomber and flown anyway? Part 2. The Man in the Cockpit. Walter Wolfrum was born on May 23, 1923, in a small Bavarian village. He volunteered for the Luftwaffe at just 17, trained first on the Focke-Wulf 44, then transitioned to the Messerschmitt Bf 109, and by early 1943 he was sent to the Eastern Front to a unit with a name that carried weight, Jagdgeschwader 52. If you know the air war in the East, you know that name. If you don't, here's what matters, G52 was the most successful fighter wing in aviation history. Not just in World War II, ever. Its pilots claimed over 10,000 enemy aircraft destroyed. And the three highest scoring aces of all time, Erich Hartmann with 352 victories, Gerhard Barkhorn with 301, and Gunther Rahl with 275, all flew in that unit. This was where a 19-year-old from a quiet Bavarian village arrived in the spring of 1943, and nobody expected him to last long. The Eastern Front was a furnace. The Soviets had rebuilt after 1941, and by 1943, their Yak-9s and La-5s could stand toe-to-toe with the Bf 109. Their pilots were improving, their numbers growing, and the war had become a brutal equation. Whoever had more would win. More aircraft, more fuel, more pilots, more factories safe beyond the Ural Mountains. Wolfram flew his first missions over Crimea in March 1943 and didn't score his first kill until June. 60 missions of learning, watching, surviving. Some pilots scored immediately, some never did. Wolfram was methodical. He studied, he adapted, he stayed alive. By April 1944, he had 70 victories. Then came May 30th. Over the Ploiești oil fields with Soviet pressure mounting and German lines bending, Wolfram claimed 11 victories in a single day. 11. The Luftwaffe called 5 victories in a day, an ace in a day. 10 made you something else entirely. It was rare. Wolfram did it, and then did it again on July 16th, claiming 10 more victories in a single day near Kamjanka. By June 1944, he reached his 100th victory. He was 21 years old, the 74th Luftwaffe pilot to reach that mark. This was the man chosen to evaluate the P-51 Mustang. Not a desk officer, not a test pilot, far from the front, but a frontline killer who had been shot down, crash-landed 12 times, wounded 4 times, and who understood in his bones what separated an aircraft that killed from one that got you killed. But before he could test the Mustang, someone had to bring it there. In 1943, Luftwaffe officer Theodor Rosarius was given one of the strangest assignments of the war: form a unit to capture, repair, and fly Allied aircraft, then use them to teach German pilots how to fight what they faced in the sky. Officially, it had a long designation. Nobody used it. They called it Rosarius's Wandering Circus, a traveling collection of enemy aircraft moving from airfield to airfield like a grim exhibition. Look at it, sit in it, understand why it's killing you. They collected everything: P-38, Lightnings P-47, Thunderbolts, Spitfires, Mosquitoes, Typhoons, and eventually the aircraft they most wanted to understand, the P-51 Mustang. To avoid being shot down by their own anti-aircraft guns, the Germans painted these captured aircraft in bright yellow markings along with German crosses. One of those Mustangs, serial number 43-24825, originally flown by an American pilot and lost over France in June 1944, was recovered, repaired, and brought into the circus. It toured German airfields, and experienced pilots were allowed to study it, walk around it, sit inside it, understand what the American pilot could see, what he couldn't, how the controls felt. Some were allowed to fly it. Walter Wolfrum was one of them. He climbed into that cockpit, took the aircraft into the air, and wrote his report. And the first thing he noticed surprised everyone. It wasn't the speed, it wasn't the firepower, it wasn't the climb rate or turning ability. The first thing Wolfram noticed was the cockpit. Pilots like Wolfram fought under impossible conditions and reported what they found with brutal honesty, even when that truth was uncomfortable. That kind of honesty matters. Part 3. What the killer found. The first thing Walter Wolfram noticed was the cockpit, and it was enormous. After thousands of hours inside the cramped Messerschmitt Bf-109, stepping into the P-51 Mustang felt like entering a different world. In the 109, everything was tight, compressed, built around the pilot's body like a tailored weapon. Your shoulders pressed against the fuselage, the cannon sat between your knees, every control within fingertip reach. It was designed for performance, not comfort. The Mustang was the opposite. The seat sat lower, the instrument panel stretched wider, and the controls felt distant. And then there was the canopy. By mid-1944, the P-51's bubble canopy offered full unobstructed visibility behind, below, and to every side. In the 109, checking behind, you meant twisting your body and hoping. In the Mustang, you simply looked. Wolfram later described the experience with precision. He had flown captured P-47s and P-51s during the war. He didn't like the Thunderbolt. It felt too large, too unfamiliar. But the Mustang was different. It felt strange, yes, but what he said next surprised everyone. He called it a fine airplane. Coming from a man with 100 victories, that wasn't praise. It was a warning. He wasn't saying it was unbeatable. He wasn't saying German pilots couldn't shoot it down. He was saying it was well-built, balanced, and dangerous. And in June 1944, that was enough to send a chill through the Luftwaffe. But the cockpit was only the beginning. When Wolfram pushed the throttle forward and the engine came alive, he felt something that changed his understanding of what an aircraft could be. The Mustang was powered by the Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin Vive 1650, delivering around 1,500 horsepower. But it wasn't just power, it was consistency. The two-stage, two-bead supercharger maintained performance at high altitude, where German engines began to fade. It adjusted automatically. No pilot input, no guesswork. The engine simply delivered whether climbing, diving, or turning regardless of altitude or temperature. And then came the detail that stopped him cold. There were no oil leaks. For a pilot shaped by the Eastern Front, that wasn't a small detail, it was everything. Winters at 40 below zero. Ground crews working before dawn, hands cracked and bleeding, manually spinning inertia starters just to bring engines to life. Oil thickening, seals failing. Every flight carrying the risk that a small mechanical issue could force you down into enemy territory. In that world, an engine that started with the push of a button, an engine that didn't leak, wasn't convenience. It was survival. This wasn't about speed or firepower. This was logistics, the hidden layer of war that decides who keeps flying and who doesn't. Wolfram wasn't alone in seeing it. Gunther Rahl, with 275 victories, also flew, captured Mustangs through Rosarius's unit. His impression was just as clear. The aircraft was excellent, but what stood out most was the engine. No oil leaks, electric start, reliability. And in war, reliability wins. Because when an aircraft becomes easier to maintain, easier to start, easier to keep in the air, it stops being just a machine. It becomes an advantage the enemy cannot match. And by the summer of 1944, that advantage was already deciding the war. Before we go further, I'm curious, where in the world are you watching this from? Right now, drop your country in the comments. Whether it's the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, Vietnam, Canada, Australia, or anywhere else. I read them all, and it's incredible to see how far these stories travel. The third highest scoring fighter ace in the history of aerial combat was talking about electric starter motors and oil seals. Not dogfighting, not gun geometry, not tactics or energy management. What he was describing was something deeper, the gap in industrial quality between the systems that built these aircraft. By early 1944, American factories were producing over 100 P-51 Mustangs every week. Each one precision machined, each one nearly identical to the last. Each one the result of an industrial system running at full, uninterrupted capacity. These factories weren't being bombed daily. They weren't forced to substitute materials or cut tolerances just to keep production moving. The Mustang didn't just perform well, it worked every time reliably. And that reliability changed everything. A German pilot who couldn't start his engine in freezing conditions lost critical minutes on the ground while American formations passed overhead. An aircraft with an oil leak had to leave the fight early or risk engine failure at altitude. Ground crews spent hours fixing problems that should have taken minutes, leaving fewer aircraft ready for the next mission. Multiply that across thousands of aircraft, across hundreds of missions, across 2 years of worsening production conditions in Germany and improving ones in America, and the conclusion becomes unavoidable. The difference wasn't just pilot skill, it wasn't just aircraft design, it was industrial civilization. And then Wolfram found something else. He climbed higher, pushed the throttle forward, and felt how the aircraft moved through the air at speed. He understood it before he could fully explain it. The wing. The P-51 had been built with a laminar flow wing, developed with an ACA designed to keep airflow smooth across more of its surface and reduce drag. In theory, it could cut drag dramatically. In practice, the gains were smaller, disrupted by dirt weather and combat wear, but something unexpected had happened. The wing performed better at high speed. The Mustang had what engineers would later call a transonic advantage. Its critical Mach number, the point where airflow begins to break down and control becomes dangerous, was higher than the BF 109, higher than the FW 190, higher than anything the Luftwaffe had. In a high-speed dive, both aircraft approached their limits, but the difference was clear. The American pilot still had control. The German pilot felt the controls stiffen. The aircraft buffet, the elevator lose effectiveness. The German solution was to break off and survive. The American solution was to stay in the fight. Some advantages can be overcome. Better pilots, better tactics, better decisions, but an advantage built into the wing itself, present in every dive, every climb, every high-speed turn, that was structural. And still, Wolfram wasn't finished. Because the most disturbing discovery wasn't the cockpit or the engine or even the wing. It was what all of those advantages created together, something you couldn't copy, couldn't reverse engineer, couldn't fix with courage or training. The thing that finally broke the Luftwaffe wasn't performance, it was endurance. 5.4. The mathematics of destruction. Imagine you are a German fighter pilot in early 1944. By every measure, you are among the best in the world. You have more combat experience than your American opponent. Your aircraft turns tighter at low speed, hits harder with its 20mm cannon, and climbs sharply enough to pull you out of danger faster than a Mustang can follow. You know the sky over Germany like you know your own reflection. And you have 90 minutes of fuel, 90 minutes to take off, climb intercept, fight, disengage, and return. Every maneuver, every burst of fire, every second spent searching burns that fuel away. And sooner or later, the order comes from the ground, break off, return to base. You don't argue. You can't. Now imagine your opponent, a P-51 Mustang carrying external drop tanks, can stay in the air for more than 7 hours. 7 hours. Gunther Rahl, one of the highest-scoring aces in history, said it plainly after flying captured Mustangs. The Spitfire was excellent, he admitted, but it didn't have the endurance of the P-51. And that, he said, was the decisive factor. They flew for 7 hours. We flew for 1 hour and 20 minutes. That makes quite a difference. That difference wasn't tactical, it was fatal. Because when you can stay in the air that long, you don't just escort bombers, you hunt. In January 1944, Lieutenant General Jimmy Doolittle made a decision that changed the war. Until then, American fighters were tied to the bombers, their mission to protect them at all costs. A sign at headquarters read, "The first duty of 8th Air Force fighters is to bring the bombers back alive." Doolittle ordered it removed. A new one replaced it. The first duty of 8th Air Force fighters is to destroy German fighters. From that moment, the rules changed. The fighters were unleashed. P-51 groups flew far ahead of bomber formations, sweeping the sky for German interceptors before they could even organize. When German fighters climbed to attack, the Mustangs were already there above them, behind them waiting. After the bombs fell, the hunt continued. American fighters roamed across Germany, strafing airfields, destroying aircraft on the ground, chasing in anything that moved. On March 4, 1944, P-51s escorted bombers all the way to Berlin, a round trip of more than 1,100 miles, and arrived with fuel to spare. When Hermann Göring heard that American fighters were over Berlin, he reportedly said, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." This was the same man who had once dismissed American industry, who believed their factories produced cars and appliances, not warplanes. Now those same factories were sending fighters deep into the heart of Germany and keeping them there. But the destruction of the Luftwaffe wasn't just about aircraft being shot down. In 1944, Germany actually produced more aircraft than ever before, over 35,000. On paper, they could replace their losses. But you can build an airplane in 6 weeks. You cannot build experience in 6 weeks. By early 1944, the Luftwaffe was losing its veteran pilots faster than it could replace them. The men who had built its reputation, the aces with dozens or hundreds of victories, were disappearing, taking with them years of instinct, judgment, and survival. Replacements arrived faster, but they arrived less prepared. And as the pipeline strained to keep up, the standards dropped. Before we move on, I want to ask you something more personal. Did anyone in your family ever serve in World War II on any side of the conflict? Maybe a pilot, a soldier, a mechanic, or someone waiting back home. If you know their story, even just a small memory or name, share it in the comments. These stories matter, and they deserve to be remembered. By late 1944, a new German fighter pilot entering combat had around 100 hours of total flight time. His American opponent had 400 or more, much of it designed to simulate real combat. 100 hours meant you could take off land, maybe handle basic maneuvers. It did not mean you had ever been in a real fight. And now, you were being sent up to intercept formations of 800 B-17s, protected by nearly 1,000 P-51 Mustangs, flown by men who had been in the air long before you ever finished training. This wasn't combat anymore. It was execution. Veteran German aces men, with 200, even 300 victories, now found themselves leading units filled with inexperienced replacements. Kurt Bulligan, one of the top aces on the Western Front, watched these young pilots arrive and disappear. Many were dead before they even understood what they had done wrong. The veterans survived because they had instincts built over hundreds of engagements. The replacements had none of that. They died one by one, mission after mission, and each loss made the next group even weaker. There is a term for this: a death spiral. The worse your pilots, the higher your losses. The higher your losses, the shorter your training. The shorter your training, the worse your pilots become. Around and around, tightening with every mission. And through all of it, the P-51s kept coming more every week, over 100 rolling off production lines, identical, reliable, capable of flying for 7 hours. And this is where Wolfram's evaluation cut deepest. Because endurance wasn't just an advantage, it changed the rules of the fight. A P-51 pilot caught in a bad position, low energy, wrong altitude, outnumbered, could disengage. He had the fuel to climb away, reposition weight, and return when the odds shifted. A Bf-109 pilot didn't have that option. With only 90 minutes of fuel, the clock was always ticking. When time ran out, you went home, or you didn't come back at all. There was no third option. The Bf-109 was a brilliant aircraft. Wolfram had flown it for over a year on the Eastern Front and scored 100 victories in it. It was fast, precise, deadly, in skilled hands. But it had been designed for a different war, a war of short-range defense, quick interceptions, fast returns. A war where the enemy couldn't stay. The P-51 was built for the war that was actually happening. A war where the enemy came from England, fought over Berlin, and still had fuel left to strafe your airfield on the way home. On July 16, 1944, the same day he claimed 10 victories near Lviv, Wolfram was severely wounded. 10 victories in a single day, placing him among the rarest pilots in history, and a wound serious enough to take him out of combat for months. He survived. He returned. But the war he came back to was no longer the same. Part 5. The Bill Walter Wolfram returned to the front in February 1945, taking command of a squadron in JG-52. He was 21 years old, with 100 victories, wearing the Knight's Cross, and carrying the scars of 4 wounds in a war that had killed most of the men he had trained with. By every standard that mattered to the Luftwaffe, he was exactly the kind of pilot Germany needed in 1945. But when he climbed back into the Bf-109, what he found was not the unit he had left. The pilots were young, many of them visibly afraid, not the kind of fear that sharpens you, but the kind that paralyzes you, the kind that comes from knowing you are not ready for what is about to happen. The aircraft were still there, but the fuel was not. The Allied oil campaign had worked. Synthetic fuel production had collapsed. Aircraft sat on German airfields fully armed and airworthy, unable to fly, because there was nothing left to put in their tanks. The fronts were collapsing on both sides. JG-52, the most successful fighter wing in history, was no longer hunting. It was retreating, relocating from one airfield to another, searching for any strip of runway still under German control. On May 8, 1945, at an airfield in Czechoslovakia, it ended. Germany surrendered. Wolfram and his unit laid down their arms to American forces. 3 weeks later, they were handed over to the Soviets. Wolfram was released relatively quickly. His wounds had been severe enough that he was classified as medically unfit. Many of his comrades were not as fortunate. Some would spend years in captivity. Some would never return. Gunther Rahl, who had also flown the captured Mustangs and understood exactly what they represented, was captured by the Americans instead. He survived the war, returned to civilian life, and later helped rebuild the new German Air Force. He rose to lieutenant general, served in NATO, and lived long enough to see a very different world. He died in 2009 at the age of 91. Wolfram, unable to stay away from the sky, became a competitive aerobatics pilot, flying no longer to survive, but for the sheer joy of it. He won the German National Aerobatics Championship in 1962 and remained one of the country's best for years. He died in 2010 at the age of 87. Both men lived long enough to speak honestly about what they had seen. Neither softened the truth. Gunther Rahl's final assessment was simple: the P-51 was the best aircraft, not just because of performance, but because of endurance. American pilots could fly for 7 hours. German pilots had barely more than one. And that difference, he said, changed everything. In the end, the air war was not decided by brilliance or heroism or even by who had the better dogfighter. It was decided by endurance, the ability to stay in the air longer, to arrive over Berlin with fuel to spare, to still be fighting when the enemy had already turned for home, to start an engine with the push of a button, to fly over 1,000 miles and still be ready to fight at the end of it. This is the final forensic conclusion. The Luftwaffe did not lose the air war because it lacked courage. German fighter pilots were, by the testimony of both their enemies and their own records, among the finest in aviation history. The system that produced men like Wolfram, Rahl, Hartmann, and Barkhorn was forged in combat and refined through experience no peacetime training could replicate. The Luftwaffe did not lose because it lacked skill. It lost because the P-51 changed the economics of the air war. Before the Mustang strategic bombing was bleeding America dry, Schweinfurt proved that unescorted bombers over Germany were not sustainable with loss rates that made survival mathematically impossible. The Luftwaffe's strategy of waiting beyond the escort line was working, and given enough time, it might have forced the Americans to abandon daylight bombing altogether. Germany had not won, but it had made victory expensive enough to question. The P-51 erased that reality in a matter of months. The escort line disappeared, and the Reich's industrial heartland became reachable on any clear day. American fighters no longer guarded, they hunted. And with over 100 Mustangs produced every week, each one reliable, identical, and ready at the push of a button, the supply became something Germany could not match. Wolfram captured this truth not in statistics, but in experience, in what it feels like when you push the throttle forward and the machine responds exactly as it should. A fine airplane. 3 words from a man with 100 victories. A man who had been shot down, wounded, crash-landed, and kept flying anyway. It wasn't praise, it was a verdict. The P-51 was not the only reason the Luftwaffe collapsed. The oil campaign destroyed fuel production. Pilot attrition erased experience that could not be replaced. Strategic bombing strained German industry even when it failed to hit its intended targets. All of these forces converged in 1944 to create a collapse that could not be reversed. But the Mustang was the instrument that made them decisive. It turned pressure into certainty, transformed escort fighters into hunters, and forced Germany's best pilots to face a reality they could not overcome. After the war, Wolfram returned to the sky as an aerobatics pilot, flying not to survive, but for the pure feeling of flight. He lived to see a different world far removed from the one he had fought in. And somewhere in the archives, his report remains calm, precise, and honest. A fine airplane. 3 words that meant, we cannot match this, not the machine, not what it represents, not the system behind it. That was the real conclusion. The Luftwaffe did not lose because of courage. It lost because it faced an enemy it could not outlast. Because in the end, wars are not won by moments, they are won by endurance.